Hello my friends, and welcome to Deadline. This game simultaneously kicks major ass and is also incredibly frustrating. So the thing about Deadline is that it's an interesting case study in what can be made on the platform, basically pushing it to its very limits. What can a group of people who are extremely passionate about a video game create on the Roblox platform despite all of its limitations? And no more clear is that than on their group page itself, which says, doing our best despite the Roblox engine. So trust me guys, I understand the stuff you're going through when it comes to developing this game. That said, I still can't just ignore some of the game-breaking issues that made me not enjoy this as much as I really wanted to. Before we talk about the issues that I had, which there were unfortunately plenty, I want to talk about the game itself. Because Deadline stands apart from a lot of other Roblox games in that it's very methodical and slow-paced. It takes clear inspiration from milsim games and games like Escape from Tarkov, of which I'm very familiar with, and so because of that, I felt pretty much right at home very quickly. It's not very difficult to understand how these games are going to play out. And of course, with the slow-paced nature of the game, it's inevitably going to run into some of the issues that people may or may not take issue with when it comes to these games. Roblox players are not exactly the patient sort, so when they get killed by some guy that's sitting in a corner and has been watching a door for the last 15 minutes, they're probably not going to be too thrilled about it. Now on the bright side, because this isn't Tarkov, it doesn't take you 15 minutes to get back into a game and you can just respawn right away. And not only that, but the developers were kind enough to add a feature into the game that shows you where you got shot from. So if someone is just camping one spot and you have no clue where you got shot from, you can figure out where it is and then go back there and chuck a nade or something. The next time around, surprise will almost certainly be on your side if they haven't moved. And so it creates a pretty solid cat and mouse dynamic when it comes to fights if you choose to go back to try to fight the same person or go somewhere else on the map. Now, as I said earlier, this game takes inspiration from milsim games, and because of that, the gunplay is unwieldy at best. This is something that is very obviously by design, but I do think that it has some drawbacks that I'll be touching on a little bit later. That said, the unwieldy nature of weapons I do think generally works to the game's benefit, setting it apart from a lot of the other arcade shooters on the platform. You can't just run around full autoing everything within an 100-meter radius, because if you try that, well, you're not gonna hit jack shit. And of course, surprise surprise, in order to offset that, the damage models in this game, well, if you get shot once or twice, it's game over, pretty much no matter what gun you're getting shot with. This means that weapon balance can be simultaneously a little bit all over the place, but also pretty solid because when there's not too much of a spread in terms of shots to kill, you're just sort of picking based off of aesthetics and recoil patterns, which I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with. Speaking of aesthetics, oh my god, the weapon customization. I would be thoroughly impressed if you managed to find a more in-depth weapon customization system on the Roblox platform. Quite simply, I'm not so sure it's possible. I used to think that Black Hawk Rescue Mission 5's weapon customization was the best of the best, but this game is without a shadow of a doubt giving them a run for their money. There are so many different attachments in this game that it can absolutely be overwhelming. And I pity the people who haven't played games like Escape from Tarkov, because trying to customize guns in this game as a newbie is probably like trying to read a different language. Fortunately, because I've played games like this in the past, I have a pretty good understanding of what's good, what isn't, and how best to mod out my guns simultaneously for aesthetics, but also for performance. Gun customization like this is kind of hard to talk about in terms of an accessibility perspective, mostly because I wouldn't even know where to begin when it would come to trying to explain this to somebody who's never seen a system like this before. I think if we're gonna look at it objectively speaking, something this overly complicated is probably bad design, but goddamn if I can't look at it and be thoroughly impressed. I'm a huge sucker for customization in games. You guys should probably know that by now. So having this level of personalization for all of the different weapons that I want to use is so welcome. There are quite literally millions of different builds that you could probably put together in this game, and that's a feat in of itself. Now, in terms of what you'll actually be doing in this game, it's pretty straightforward. There are a couple of game modes. I'm not entirely sure if I'll be covering all of them, but they're your pretty standard affair, whether it be team deathmatch, domination, king of the hill, etc. And I will say that it is kind of interesting playing a more hardcore game on these arcade-style game modes. I would say it's more akin to what I was sort of hoping that Escape from Tarkov Arena would turn out to be, rather than what it ended up being, which was basically a One Life Rainbow Six knockoff. And I will say that I'm really glad that they decided to go this route rather than going with a Rainbow Six knockoff, because I've played 100 of those by now, so it's a nice change of pace. Now, while I've said plenty of good things about the game, and as much as I did enjoy playing it, I think there are some fatal issues that I'm sure the developers already know about, so it's almost pointless bringing it up for them, but for the sake of people who may be thinking about trying this, take this as mostly a PSA of things that you will be running into that are incredibly frustrating. A lot of which unfortunately stem from almost certainly Roblox itself. First order of business, frame rate. This game has an incredibly spotty frame rate, and this is coming from someone that's running on a 4090. So needless to say, regardless of what your specs are, you're gonna have some lag spikes and things that can potentially get really frustrating really quickly. On this one map that I played, it felt like 50% of the game was running at 10 to 15 frames per second, and obviously 10 to 15 frames per second in a first-person shooter, not exactly playable. It wasn't just on this map though. There were plenty of other maps where seemingly at random, things would just start slowing down to an absolute crawl. I don't know what causes these lag spikes, and I would wager the developers also probably don't know what causes these, otherwise they'd be fixed, but good lord, is it annoying. Dying to a lag spike like this just makes me want to Alt F4 the game, and that feeling gets doubled when we talk about teleporting enemies. The worst part of the game, hands down, no questions. As I said before, Deadline pushes Roblox to its limits, and no more is that clear than the connection instability. I want to make it clear that this is not my internet that's causing these lag spikes. It's the game itself. I'm sure there will be clips on screen right now, but watching enemies teleport around your screen and then kill you instantly is horrifically frustrating. There's nothing more frustrating than that. How are you expected to line up shots while someone's running if every 3 feet they stop in place and then teleport 15 feet forward? It's awful. This doesn't happen all the time. I wouldn't even say this happens most of the time, but it happens enough to be infuriating. I don't know what the developers need to do on their back end to try to sort some of this stuff out, but regardless, I don't know. I don't have any words for it other than, good God, it's annoying. Now, those are the engine-related problems. There were some issues that were just more of, I guess, minor nitpicks that come from me myself. And the first I want to talk about is map design. Map design in the game is not bad, but I think there were a couple of questionable aspects of some of the maps that I played that I can pretty easily sum up with just sort of no man's land with no cover. It's not like cover is completely absent on this map, but more often than not, you'll have to cross areas of the map that have big empty open areas or big empty open streets where if someone's just sitting there watching it, you're effectively resigned to die. And getting from point A to point B should not always be the biggest struggle in the game just because one person decided to watch a lane and make it completely inaccessible. I think a lot of the maps could use with some more boxes and things around that would block lines of sight so that way you weren't constantly getting sniped while just trying to get to where you want to go. I would also be remiss not to mention the bushes, which is the worst mechanic I've ever seen in a first-person shooter I think I've ever played. Some genius decided that people camping in bushes would be a real problem, so their solution? Make it so you can't aim down sights at all when you're in them. Now, this wouldn't be a problem if some of the maps in the game didn't have bushes absolutely everywhere and consistently put them in areas where people can just blast you from 100 different angles and you're barely obscured by the bush. Like, I get it, bush campers are annoying, but you can't then litter your map with bushes in all of these different areas that you have to traverse in order to not get instantly blasted, and then make it completely impossible to fight back if you're in one. You can already camp doorways, you can already camp in windows and look out over giant sight lines. People are gonna sit in bushes, and the answer is not to make it impossible to go through bushes just to stop people from camping in them. You should be able to aim down sights in a bush, just plain and simple. Now, speaking of snipes, let's talk about snipers. I did say that I was going to talk about the unwieldy gameplay earlier, and here's my chance, but first I want to talk about sniper rifles because they segue directly into that. When you have a game with one-shot kill, borderline hit scan sniper rifles, they're almost always going to be overpowered. That's just the way it is. Anyone who's been playing shooters for any amount of time knows this. There's a reason the AWP in Counter-Strike is basically the most powerful gun in the game. Hit scan, one-hit snipers are busted. Now, that doesn't stop games from putting them in anyway, and they also don't just ruin every game they're in. Far from it. I don't even think they ruined this game. That said, I think the game could have done a better job to dissuade against the one-shot kill sniper rifles, and that's where I want to talk about the unwieldy gunplay. Because unfortunately, the reality of the day is that when you're further away from an enemy, if you don't have a sniper rifle and the enemy does, you're basically completely screwed, even if it's just at medium range. Maybe this is incorrect, but in my experience, within 20 to 30 meters, full auto is completely worthless. And because of that, you're gonna be single firing or bursting. And if that's the case, if you hit them with one shot and then they shoot you with a sniper, you're dead. I know because I was using the sniper, and that's exactly what happened in every round I used it. If you just stick to a relatively decent range, you're basically immortal unless someone gets lucky or they also have a sniper rifle, which doesn't feel particularly good. And so that's where I get into talking about the recoil when it comes to these guns, and the fact that I feel like recoil could be toned down a little bit, especially on the full autos. I'm not saying we should have laser beams or anything of the sort, but if someone's within 20 or 30 meters and I start full autoing at them and they're using a sniper rifle, it shouldn't be an automatic win for the sniper guy. That's not right. And admittedly, I didn't use the submachine guns, so I'm sure they probably fare a little bit better in full auto, but at least from an assault rifle perspective, it's a bit of a yikes. And the issue is honestly even further compounded by the fact that when you are single firing or bursting, the recoil is still off the charts. You would think realistically that it would make sense that recoil would build gradually over time, so the longer you shot, the more recoil you would have. But it seems to me that in this game the recoil is pretty static, and so your first shot recoil is always going to be massive, making it so that way follow-up shots are easier said than done, and once again further emphasizing a sniper rifle because, well, you only need one shot. You don't need any follow-ups. Anyways, like I said, it's more of a nitpick than a major issue. And speaking of nitpicks rather than major issues, I want to talk about sound a little bit. The sound design in this game is impeccable. It's really, really well done. The stress of getting shot at and the cracking of bullets whizzing by is super, super immersive. That said, when it comes to a gameplay perspective, especially on player movement, I think they could have done a little bit better of a job. And that mostly stems from the Tarkov problem of sprinting being loud as all shit, making it so that way if you're sprinting anywhere near an enemy, they pinpoint exactly where you are all of the time. Now, I think they tried to mitigate this a little bit by making constant environmental noises like helicopters and planes flying overhead to mask your movement noise, which is a really cool decision in order to try to play around with that. But the end-all be-all is I feel like running versus everything else is so unbelievably loud, and you're already at a massive disadvantage if you're sprinting as it is. If you sprint around a corner and there's someone there, you need to pull your gun up from sprinting and then ADS. And if they're already sitting there and already ADS'd, you're dead anyway. So it's like insult to injury when they can immediately hear you coming from a mile away and just wait for you to sprint around the corner and insta-kill you. I'm not saying sprinting should be silent or sound should be a non-factor, but in its current state, it's loud as all hell and basically impossible not to notice. People that sit still and don't move already have enough advantages as it is. I don't think they need even more by being able to consistently pinpoint exactly where anybody is if they even think about touching shift on their keyboard. But really, aside from those things, I don't have too much else to say. Aside from all of the issues that I had, I was really impressed by Deadline, and if you have any interest in shooters, I highly recommend checking it out. I'm sure this video will underperform because my videos on shooters, Roblox or not, always do, but seriously, if you watched this is a game clearly developed by incredibly passionate people who deserve your support. So if you have time, go check it out. Anyways, with that, I am done. So if you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like and subscribe. If you didn't, don't. And with all that being said, have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time.